here with our friends from LaunchKC. I'll let everybody, you guys all have mics. I think the button on the left unmutes you. And so I'll let you guys introduce yourself, and then Jim, I think you're going to take us through some information. We're here to talk about the upcoming LaunchKC grants competition, right? So why don't we take a second and let everybody introduce themselves first. So the button on the left, the other left, that one, hit it once. There you go. Becca, we'll start with you.
Okay, I was going to start with Jim. Hi, I'm Becca Castro, and I work for Economic Development Corporation of Kansas City as the Strategic Initiatives Manager. And so I've been working a lot on LaunchKC the last couple months.
And my name is Tommy Wilson. I'm the Director of Business Recruitment at the Downtown Council of Kansas City, and I've been working on LaunchKC since 2014.
Jim Erickson, Director of Strategic Initiatives. I work with Becca at the Economic Development Corporation of Kansas City. And I'll kind of just go right into our presentation.
Knock yourself out.
This is my clicker. So LaunchKC is not a standalone organization. LaunchKC is a joint initiative between the EDC and the Downtown Council. And tonight we're going to start off our discussion by kind of explaining why we exist or what space we're trying to play in. There's a lot, if anyone has ever seen the KC SourceLink resource rail, there's a lot of support for entrepreneurs in Kansas City. Everyone has a little bit different aim, and we're no different. We are laser focused on a couple areas, which we'll go through. But it's helpful to know that LaunchKC kind of has two sides. One side is very visible here at Keystone. It's kind of our accelerator side. You know, over the years, we've run several different industry-based accelerators. And then also this last year, we launched one called Kansas City Social Venture Studio, which we're very proud of and we'll discuss here in a little bit. Keystone is our programming partner and has done a tremendous job of making that idea become a reality and a very good reality at that. But the other side of LaunchKC is the grants competition. And that's kind of the side that a lot of folks historically know us from. That's where we kind of were born in this space in 2015. And that's kind of where we're coming back now and what we're really excited to bring back to the market. There we go. LaunchKC does not exist without a ton of support from various partners. So at any chance, we like to thank those who have partnered with us either financially or in kind or in other ways. We have a great support system. And as we move forward, we're always trying to have more folks under that tent. But essentially, why does LaunchKC exist? A good city, a city that we all want to be proud of, a city that has a vibrant future must have a healthy ecosystem for entrepreneurs and startups. It's just the life cycle of businesses. As we look around at Cerner, at KC Southern, at Sprint, you know, some of these big legacy headquarters, these big legacy companies for Kansas City, there's nothing that says they have to stay here forever. There's nothing to say that, you know, other headquarters that may have business plans that could become obsolete. You know, I don't know where Blockbuster was headquartered, but it was headquartered somewhere, and I'm sure that community thought that they were going to have them as a vibrant part of their community for the next 100 years. And so to combat that, we need to make certain that as a city, Kansas City has a continuous stream of high growth potential startups that turn into the next generation of job creators and economic engines for the city. That's the space that LaunchKC is in. We are trying to find today's entrepreneurs and startups when they may be three people strong and find who's scalable, who can become that next generation of great KC companies. That's what we're trying to do. And so when you look at the research, that's exactly what it says is the cities that are thriving, the cities that are doing the best economically, they have a lot of startups, they have a lot of entrepreneurs, and there's a healthy ecosystem supporting them. You get your most job growth, surprisingly, from early stage companies. In our industry and economic development, there's always this focus on the Panasonics or the Amazons, and those are fantastic projects, don't get me wrong. But when you look at it overall, nationwide, your net biggest opportunity is with early stage companies. Also, during times of economic downturn or a pandemic, it's the cities that have a large number of firms, particularly large number of early stage firms, that fare the best, that are the most economically resilient moving forward. And so if a high number of early stage companies in a city are important, if supporting entrepreneurs and early stage companies is how great cities get ahead, how is Kansas City doing in this regard? And unfortunately, the answer is terrible. We are simply not doing enough for early stage companies in this city, especially when you look at how we are compared to our peer cities. This is all data that we have borrowed from the Mid-America Regional Council through the KC Rising Initiative. And when they talk about Kansas City's biggest opportunities and biggest shortfalls, they zero in on entrepreneurship and what we're doing with early stage companies. And so that's the space we play in. And so when we see this data, it makes us even more motivated to deliver quality programming. This one, I think of all the graphs that we had looked at in our research, was probably the most alarming. KC Rising compares us to the cities, 30 cities, 15 that are immediately bigger than us in population, 15 that are immediately smaller than us. So our true peer cities, 30 of them. So the average of those cities, they've seen a 3.5% increase in overall number of companies since, I think, 2016. How's Kansas City done? We've actually lost 2.2% of our firms. So that's just by numeric amount of companies. Is that big companies? Is that middle-sized companies? No. The research also shows on the right that it is overwhelmingly in the space of early stage companies. That's where we are losing firms, and that's where Kansas City absolutely has to get this turned around if we want to see a vibrant future. So we are not doing enough to support early stage companies, and we are not churning out enough early stage companies in return. There's all kinds of data that supports this. I'm just picking a couple data points, but you can look at the amount of support for early stage companies as in grants or equity investments per job in an early stage company, whatnot. We continuously rank either amongst the bottom or the very last of those 30 peer cities. And so I don't want this to be a doom and gloom presentation. Kansas City actually fared very well in a lot of the different categories, but when it came to early stage company support, this is where we need to take steps forward. So that's why LaunchKC exists. We want to provide needed funding, needed programming for Kansas City's next generation of promising early stage companies. That's why we do everything on the accelerator side, and that's why we're really excited to return the grants we'll be talking about here in a minute. This is kind of a little bit of an illustration of what we've done in the past. See, we had a grants competition for 4 straight years. We had 36 companies grow through that grants competition. And then over the years, we've also noticed that Kansas City is under accelerated. I don't know if that's a word, but I use it anyway. And so we've also tried to step up in that space as well. And we've delivered several industry-based accelerators in that time. You know, when we look at the amount of job creation, and how are the companies that have gone through this program doing? We're actually starting to see some incredible results. LaunchKC invests in early stage companies. That may mean some of these are 3, 4, 5 employees strong when we work with them. Well, with the right support, with the right connections, these folks grow, and that's exactly what our data has shown us. We had maybe 5, 10 jobs associated with the portfolio those first couple of years. We're at 690 now, and that's actually being fairly conservative because we're not counting part-time jobs that would number, I think, closer to 5,000. So again, early stage companies become big companies, and that's what Kansas City really needs to see moving forward, is more growth like this. We want to return the grants competition because we've seen what it has already delivered, and we know that if we commit to doing this year after year, having 10, 15, 20 companies continuously supported through LaunchKC, it's going to lead to incredible results for Kansas City, and we can maybe start to make a difference on some of those metrics that we were looking at earlier. Another one, let's talk about diversity. When you look at Kansas City's business community, it's not a surprise to anyone that the makeup is not diverse. We look at region-wide, the number's about 25% or less in terms of companies that are women and or minority-owned. And so that number is clearly not representative of the city that we live in. We're proud that LaunchKC is at 58%. Women are minority led. That's something that we like to say, but we're also still cognizant that when you look at our city, it's even north of that. I think it would be closer to 70% would be at equilibrium. And so we still know that we have work to do in that regard, but we are proud to be moving that needle. Diversity and inclusion is something that we have really taken seriously. And it's not just at the point of selections, it's at the point of everything that we do, finding judges, reaching out to prospective businesses, how we recruit and whatnot. And so it's been very important. And I think we've seen that strategy start to pay off. And without further ado, I'm going to play us a quick video and then ask Tommy and Becca to overview the grants competition moving forward.
We're for the believers. The ones who don't wait for opportunity. They create it. The ones who see a good idea and they invest in it. Powered by a purpose to ignite Kansas City's entrepreneurial spirit, we started LaunchKC in 2015 to bring these people together, to bridge an entrepreneurial gap, to create tomorrow's major employers, to provide opportunity, to grow our economy and strengthen our community. Because we believe the promise of tomorrow starts with championing the people building it today. We're LaunchKC, and we believe in the believers.
That's the first time I've seen that. That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah. You want to go through any of these?
We just kind of wanted to have it up there in case we needed to remember a number, but we can also.
Fantastic. No, I got plenty of questions. So I get the why. I mean, we've heard the story about, trying to fill the gap and so on, but let's talk a little bit more about the history of LaunchKC so everybody has some kind of context. Where did the idea to actually do the grants competition? Because that's where it all started, was the grants competition. So let's talk a little bit more about the history. Tommy, you've been around since the beginning.
Yeah, so LaunchKC, as Jim mentioned, was a partnership and still is a partnership of the Economic Development Corporation and the Downtown Council. We started this process in 2014. Our first class of grant recipients was in 2015. And it really came from our desire, both EDC and Downtown Council, to help small businesses and to help them grow in our community and in our city and in our downtown. And so we did 4 years of the grants competition between 2015 and 2018. We then started partnering with local Kansas City corporations to run industry-focused accelerators. We partnered with NBKC Bank. We partnered with Brush Creek Partners and Black and Beach. But yeah, over the last year and even this year, we've realized that in kind of ending the grants competition, we left a gap in the Kansas City market that wasn't being met and needed to be met. And so this year we decided to kind of revisit the grants competition, tweak it a little bit, renew it, and bring it back in 2022.
I want to come back to the accelerators, but let's stay with the grants competition for a minute. What were kind of the early learnings from the grants competition? So you ran for 4 years. So, I think about every program that I've ever been associated with, even the social venture studio that we're in the middle of right now. There's so much learning from that first year or even that second year of, man, we should do this differently, or this is the type of companies we should look for. What were those, Tommy, I guess from your perspective, what were those kind of early learnings as you guys went through that process?
Well, we realized that we ourselves were like a startup. We were constantly needing to fundraise and find sustainable funding so that we could offer this program to startups. And so it was a need to find good partners to help us do this initiative and this program, good funding partners. But then I think we also learned, some of the companies that had the most success and that stayed were companies where Kansas City was already, the industry they were in was an industry where Kansas City had a lot of strength and a lot of expertise. So we kind of started focusing in on certain industry verticals when we were even doing our grants competition, that we had about 8 to 10 that we kind of focused in on. We learned about what kind of support they needed. Each company was a little different, so we would meet with them to see what their needs were and try and tailor a plan to help them grow that was specific to whatever their needs were. And we kind of learned that in that program that there is some general programming and education that needs to happen, but again, each company is in a different place and has specific needs. I think in the early days, we were kind of each of our companies was kind of spread out in 3 different locations, and we learned, like, when they're going through this program, it's best if they're all together, learning from each other, building community, and that's something where we never quite did in the early years of the grants competition, but we're going to do now. Like, they'll all office together, they'll all do programming together, so that they build community. And of course, then and now we learn the importance of just connecting them to the larger Kansas City community, the business community, the entrepreneurial community. And the more they get connected, the more they feel like this is like their home and they can grow here and they can stay here. And so that was important too.
Yeah, I'd also add on that one of the lessons learned was not to fall too much in love with the out-of-town company. We are open for companies to relocate here. We want to find companies that want to make Kansas City home. That's great. But I think in the early days, there was an overemphasis on that. And now we have a very different view, and we've kind of talked with some best practices around the nation in this regard. We want to find companies that need to be here, that have a personal reason to be here, or they have 2 of their top 3 clients are here. They have a compelling reason to not only come for the grants competition, but to stay and be part of our community long term. Otherwise, we have plenty of talent right here in Kansas City, Missouri, and if that's what makes up the majority of the cohort, that's not a bad thing at all. Social Venture Studio was 100% comprised of local companies, and that cohort is fantastic. Hello, Dr. Cooper, one of our members back there. And so I think that's another lesson learned, is we have a lot of talent here, and we can add into the mix to attract new startups, but we don't need that like we probably thought we did early on.
When we started the Sprint Accelerator, the first cohort was all out-of-town companies. We even had, I think, a couple international companies in the cohort. And our primary goal of the program, or one of our primary goals of the program, was to retain those companies in Kansas City. And we found it was difficult if you didn't have a member in the cohort from Kansas City, because there's that peer relationship that they form where, whoever's doing the programming is oftentimes seen as, kind of the outsider or the teacher or the parent or whatever, like they would go to Green Lady Lounge or they would go, to Grinders to eat on a regular basis just amongst themselves. And we found that if you had a local company in the cohort, the chances of them upselling Kansas City and talking about where they live and the features and why they like it here and that kind of thing was much better than if we were doing a sales pitch, or if we brought KCADC or one of the civic organizations in to kind of pitch them on the resources available and those types of things. You needed somebody that was a little bit more organic and had the ability to connect them to the community. So I think that's a common lesson that we've seen across programs. When we were doing, so next question about the grant competition, when we were doing Keystone focus groups for entrepreneurs back in 2018, 2019, we were focused on the LaunchKC accelerator pieces. Like, what do you want to see in accelerators? What industries? What kind of resources do you want? And so on. And we were one theme that kept coming back up, which was, where's the grants competition? Where's the grants? Bring the grants back, that kind of thing. And I know you guys were hearing similar, I think, tones around that time of bring the grant competition back. And it was a little bit more specific than bring grants back. It was bring grants back. Look what's happening in St. Louis. Look what has happened with Arch Grants. I know you guys have spent time with that team. What have you learned from, their, I think, trajectory and some of the things that they've done over there? What can you share with us that you've learned from them?
Well, we have great partners at Arch Grants in St. Louis. They've even met with us whenever we want to meet with them and talk. They're willing to meet with us, and they're great partners. And from the beginning, Arch Grants has just done a grants competition. They do that every year. And then over time, they increase the number of grants they've given. So they started as well with 10 grants every year. And last year, I think they went up to 30. But they realized
Did the check size change, or did they just increase the number?
It has just changed now. Like this year, they've always given $50,000 and now they're giving 75. So last year, they topped out at 30, but I think even talking to them, that was too many to enter into a program at one time. So they've come back to 20. And so, but they've just consistently done that, and they've been wildly successful. I think they shoot for 50% of the companies they bring in every year from St. Louis, and 50% are from out of the market. And all the ones out of the market, I think they've told us like 75% of them have stayed. And so those are the kind of aspirations and goals that we're shooting for, that we want to do. And just kind of seeing their consistency with it, I think helps us see restarting this grants competition and sticking with it. It would be a good path for us.
I think one other thing, when we met with them that they talked a lot about was the community that they build, not only with current grant winners, but also with their alumni. So they kind of phrase it as, we're partners for life. And so that's something too that we aspire to do, and certainly to do better immediately in this next grants competition, but continue to grow that alumni community and really be a support beyond the year that we work directly with you, that you win the grant.
Lessons learned question you asked. Moving from an event to a program has been something that we've really learned. And that's a lot of what Becca has been doing with LaunchKC, is changing that dynamic from a one-off event that we get to celebrate to something that turns us into like Arch Grants partners for life.
So let's talk about the current programming. So since we're kind of shifting a little bit from the grant itself, right? But with the power of the grant, this non-dilutive opportunity to provide money for the companies is very powerful. We know that, but it isn't just about the event, the big check on stage, all of those types of things. We've seen that the programming is important. So what's the current programming, and then what are thoughts around, potential opportunities? I know we've talked about alumni. We've talked about, building this network, this coalition of former LaunchKC. I mean, there's 96, 92 companies that have gone through. So what are the other thoughts around programming, and where you guys are going with that?
I mean, I guess I'll just be honest. Right now, I think we have a structure in place. And so that'll be the programming will really start in January. And so each quarter we'll have a social event, because you kind of talk about that stickiness factor, really giving founders an opportunity to get to know Kansas City, to get to know each other, and understand what makes this a great place to live and work. And then we'll also have some sort of capacity building opportunity each quarter. And so I think we have ideas, but one thing we really want to do is learn from our partners. So you being one of them, Keystone. We just had a conversation with Charlotte and got some ideas there. And then also just talking to the entrepreneurs themselves. What is it that you need? Where are you? And what are your goals in this year? And how can we support that? So I can't really say we have necessarily programming, scheduled, but really being open to what the needs are and making that happen.
But definitely sounds like the intent this next go around is the event is the beginning of a year for these startups now, instead of the end of a competition. Is that the way to think about this going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we now see it. There may be an event at the beginning where we're announcing, hey, here's our cohort for the year, but then ending with an event as well, where they also get an opportunity to pitch to follow-on investors. And so it may kind of be bookend with events with some programming, as Becca mentioned, in the middle. And as Becca talked about, kind of curating programming for each one. Even in our application, which will open in a few weeks, we're asking them where they're at and what their needs are right now. And so even as we're looking at their applications, we already get an idea of what they need and how we can meet that in Kansas City when they come to Kansas City and join our program. So that's kind of what we're thinking about programming right now.
Now, don't give me the dumb look when I ask this, because I know the easy answer here is $50,000. But why should a startup apply to be in the program? And who?
I'll let Becca or Tommy touch on who, but like we've said, we're expanding past the grant, but obviously the grant's a big piece. Non-dilutive capital is one of the biggest needs of early stage companies, and so a $50,000 check is a big deal, and that's going to help a lot of companies. We have companies that have hundreds, if not thousands, of employees right now that will tell us that $50,000 at one point in their journey made or broke them, and so that's never something to overlook. Real estate, being able to go through this with their cohort, so with other companies. There's going to be a mentorship component. And so we want to make certain that these companies leave that year having connected with some of Kansas City's most prominent leaders, especially in the industries that they are in. And then also programming. We recognize that those of us at a larger organization, we may have an entire department that does finance. I don't touch our finances. We may have a dedicated person for HR. I don't touch HR. But when you're an entrepreneur, you're doing it all. And so there's a constant need for all of the above skill set training. And so that's also another piece of what we hope to deliver.
We're looking for tech startups that have a scalable business model with high growth potential. And we're looking for those that are in pre-seed, seed stage with revenue under $3 million. I mean, that's kind of the list we tick off. But then I'll talk a little bit about like what would set a company apart. And so a couple things we're looking for there is what we've hit on a bit here is what's your compelling reason for doing business in Kansas City? We really want those companies where it makes total sense for them to be here. Another thing is looking at what equity and inclusion means to these companies. And so that might show up in their team. It might show up in their policies, might show up in the way they've designed their product. And so we really want to hear about what that means to them as a business owner, because we want to create companies that other Kansas Cityans want to work at.
LaunchKC doesn't take equity today in any of the companies.
With $234 million of follow-on investment, we might have made a mistake not taking equity. No, there's a lot of equity partners. There's a lot of debt partners available for businesses. Non-dilutive capital is something that we understood this market to need, and that's something that we've tried to be committed to this point. We have explored other payback models, whether just in good faith or hey, when your company reaches a certain point, we'd love to have you back in LaunchKC as a sponsor, kind of create an ecosystem for Kansas City entrepreneurs by Kansas City entrepreneurs. That would be a very compelling message. But at this point, we have steered away from equity.
So we should talk about what that LaunchKC equity fund looks like at some point in time, right? That's the future endowment opportunity or the future, how do you participate in the $230 million of follow-on funding and create a sustainable model, right?
We have noticed that number a few times and hit our heads against the wall a few times. And also let's, point out that other organizations, some of our competitors or frenemies, like Arch Grants or Buffalo is a great organization. They have sometimes staffs of 9 folks. They have multi-million-dollar endowments. So what we have done is really on a shoestring budget and staffing level. I mean, you're looking at the LaunchKC team right now. And all of us have other responsibilities as well. This is not really our full 100% gig. And so there's also a capacity issue. If you want to start tapping into a major equity fund, you need to do that and do it right and do it thoughtfully.
Well, I think your state peers have done, MTC, I know, is an investor. Network Kansas, I know, just got a tranche of money from the Department of Commerce in the state of Kansas to be a fund to fund other funds, but they're an investor. So this is not unheard of to actually be participating at the equity level in these types of things, right? I mean, this is...
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say, as we think about really creating a community and creating that partnership, a piece of that is, the entrepreneurs that are winning this year what are they doing to give back in 5 years or 2 years? And that might be time and mentoring new grant winners, but it can also be a financial investment back into the entrepreneurial community. And so that's a piece of it as we talk about creating this community. What are the, I guess, expectations of each of the stakeholders within that community? And so we've been just kicking around ideas, but I think that's something we need to really seriously think about as we move forward and create, that community.
Yeah, ultimately, we're able to do this with the best of intentions. We're a civic entity. Our goal is to grow the Kansas City economy. It's not to get rich or pad our budgets. And so we can do this in a way where we basically ask what's best for the health of Kansas City's future entrepreneurship ecosystem. If that involves us having new, innovative financial models to go back into the fund, we're always going to explore that.
So Becca, you touched a little bit on kind of what, down this path of what the expectation of the startup is. And so one of them might be some type of, give back opportunity, whether it's through mentorship and a requirement there, or whether it's actually through financial contribution at a certain stage in their company, those types of things. How should we be thinking about the other requirements of the startups that are in the grant competition or in the LaunchKC program?
Currently the expectation is that you are in Kansas City operating, and one of the perks of the program is that you get office space in downtown Kansas City. So one of the requirements is that you're operating your business in Kansas City, Missouri for a year in that downtown space. What else is there?
Well, I would say that's the major one. So especially if they're an out of market company, right up front in our application, we're saying if we choose you, you're agreeing to move to Kansas City, Missouri. And so, and for at least a year. And then it's kind of our hope and job in that year is to integrate them into our community in such a way that they want to grow here and stay here. And at the very least, open a satellite office here or stay here or do business with Kansas City companies here. So in some way they're impacting and growing our economy while they themselves are growing.
Shameless plug on this one. So I would say that the two things, when I heard you talk about early lessons and things that, from whether it was a grant competition or the accelerator pieces, giving them extra reasons to want to be in Kansas City, like the industry connections, the partners they're working with, like those are the things that are going to make them want to stay more so than, an obligation to a $50,000 non-dilutive, kind of investment in the company, whatever it might be. And so continuing to build those sector relationships, those partnerships throughout the programming piece will be important. The other thing is place. LaunchKC really hasn't had place prior to this, right? It's been kind of best effort, where the partners are, where you can find space, and that's tended to spread the cohorts out, right?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, in our first years of the grants competition, we may have 3 of the startups here, 3 of them here, 3 of them here. So they were spread out around downtown. Now it's bringing them into one place where they're, as Becca talked about, building a community amongst each other and hopefully with the larger entrepreneurial community of Kansas City. And we think that's really important. We're looking forward to implementing that piece moving forward.
Which is another reason why we're so excited about Keystone.
See, that was the shameless plug piece. I'll go ahead and take that one. It's interesting when you go to places, and people always ask, what are those aspirational innovation districts that Kansas City should be thinking about? And one of my favorite examples is Durham, North Carolina. In 2011, Durham, North Carolina, I think had between 7 and 10 startups in downtown Durham. They were in a population decline, pretty steep population decline of the cities in that area. The Goodman family, who owns Capital Broadcasting there in Durham, North Carolina, they also own the Durham Bulls. So yes, they are really a baseball team if you've ever seen Bull Durham. They had just built a new stadium for the team. It was right across from an old abandoned tobacco campus. They were having trouble getting people to the games. They were also thinking about how do we, from an economic development perspective, their core business, their family business is eyeballs, since they owned all the broadcasting, kind of entities, the news channels and so on in the area. And so they bought one of the sons, Mike Goodman, bought the American Tobacco campus that was across the street from the stadium. It was this big warehouse complex, and opened up a facility called American Underground. which they went from 7 startups in 2011 to, I think the last count they had somewhere between 285 and 315 startups in this one building. And go talk to the folks at J.E. Dunn and they'll say that's one of their top construction markets right now. They have cranes in the sky everywhere. They're back to a rapid population growth. They have Google for Entrepreneurs that has planted a flag in Durham. Duke moved their continuing education program over next to all these startups. Like the startups created a magnet for resources, which then created a magnet for more startups, which now you have venture capital in the area, those types of things. And that's, I think, speaks to the value of the density that, a program like this with this number of startups that you're touching on a regular basis, especially if it grows over time, can be tremendously valuable to have them kind of sharing a community, a physical community as well. So I'm lucky to have partners like this who are, invested in increasing economic development through the startup community, and that's the focus. So I appreciate you guys, doing that. I again want to say thank you to all of you for not only being here tonight and sharing what you're doing with LaunchKC and with the new grants competition, but for 8 years of sustained support for the entrepreneurial community. As Jim mentioned, we do underfund in Kansas City in terms of the support organizations, the support for startups, those types of things. I know there's a few folks, I see a few people even in the audience who share the, I think, pain of, how do you fund the ecosystem itself? So thank you all for the, I think, sustained support for LaunchKC, for what you've been doing and for bringing grants back. That's pretty cool. So thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.